that was great. And he said that man is a liturgical animal. In fact, he called man homo orans. Orans coming from the Latin meaning to pray or to supplicate. And that if man does not have a liturgical outlet, he will find it in other things. He will find that outlet in other things. And liturgy meaning, you want to know where the word liturgy comes from?
It originally meant work. Or...
It means, ergi, meaning like ergonomics, work. And then this comes from the Greek word for people. Okay, so literally it means work of the people, or people work. Okay, work of the people. And this work of the people, this work of worshiping together in order to not only gain an understanding of God, but to be close to Him, is something that is deep within man. Other philosophers of religion have called this transcendence. Mm-hmm. And if man does not have a liturgical outlet, he'll make pathways for himself, or he'll try to find other outlets. I'll give you an example. He's watching. Sorry, I'm using you as an example, buddy. But back when I lived in Wyoming, there was a guy I worked with who was an atheist. He still is an atheist, probably, and he was really into CrossFit. You know, nothing against CrossFitters. It's not for me, but you know, it's group exercise. It's almost like people suffering together because they're doing all these compound exercises with lots of weights, and I mean, he was very devout with it. He kept up with it, and I mean, he did like 2 or 3 workouts each day. He was devoted to this, and I told him, I said, you're like the saint of CrossFit. He's like, well, why do you say that? I said, because if we had your devotion in the Orthodox Church, it'd be wonderful. But this was an outlet for him, because he found people that were into the same thing that he was into, performing an action that was shared. And in fact, there's a lot that has been written, especially in, I think, First Things, and several Orthodox theologians have come out and said this, that the more a society goes towards secularism, they go back to classical values, classical Western values, and one of those is fitness, cult of the body, and that whole, you know, going back to the gymnasium and things like that. I mean, there is a CrossFit place that's right near my home. It's always full. Yet when I pass this place, it's, you know, or I pass churches even, you know, they're kind of empty, or you know, maybe they have 1 or 2 people there. So it's, I mean, things have changed. Okay, so any questions about that, about God and man?
You remind me of something. A book I would love for you to read if you haven't is Johann Huizinga, Homo Ludens. Means man the player. And he defines play as activities that you enter into wholeheartedly for their own sake. They don't pay off. They don't make you rich. They're not on their way to something else. They're for their own sake. And it's a very profound book. And one of the things that he says in it is that liturgy fits his definition of play because it is its own goal. Doing it is the payoff.
Right.
You don't do it because it will lead to such and such. You do it for its own sake.
Right. Because we believe as Orthodox Christians, and I'll explain this in a minute, that the Divine Liturgy is literally, I mean, it's one of the only services, with the exception of a few, because they were once tied with liturgy, where we sing, "Blessed is the Kingdom." Notice, if you go to an Orthodox church, we started tonight with "Blessed is our God," because we didn't do liturgy. But when we do liturgy, listen at the beginning. It says, "Blessed is the Kingdom." It's at that moment where the priest is proclaiming on behalf of the church, the kingdom's here.
We're in the kingdom.
We're in the kingdom, and not just the heavenly kingdom, but we're standing upon the precipice of Judgment Day. And that we've been taken literally outside of time and space into this one moment where we stand on the precipice of Christ's second coming. And that's symbolized with the Eucharist. I mean, it's fulfilled in the Eucharist, not just a symbol, because we're all partaking of Christ's body, not just his body, but his resurrected body. And so, that's an excellent, I guess, way of explaining liturgy in a nutshell. That is its own goal.
Father Philip quoted somebody as saying we should take off our watches at liturgy because we're outside of time.
We're outside of time, we're outside of space. That, as I often say, that when God looks down, when the Father looks down upon 1237 Landry Road, he not just sees it, he just doesn't see us, but he sees his Son looking back at him. That's what he sees. So that's regarding God and regarding man. Now, the church. What is the church? I mean, we could probably go and explain how the liturgy, not a liturgy, but just its own lecture, I guess, explaining what the church is. One day I'll probably have a lecture on that as to what is the church, how do we find the church, what is the true church? Is the church a social club for converts? Is it a social club for ethnic Orthodox? But all that will be answered later. But the church mainly is the institution established by Christ to join God and man. That is the mission of the church. That is the goal of the church. That's why the church was established by Christ. In the Orthodox view, their church is the living embodiment of Christ. That's what I told you, that when we have liturgy, that's when we become the church. That's probably the best example or the best moment when we embody the church. Because not only does God look at us individually, but he sees his Son looking back at him. He sees the body of Christ. That's where we talk about Paul. Paul talks about the body of Christ. He's talking about us too.
Father Philip talked about the angels being present there, and that I think it was his father, but several priests he knew had the experience of seeing angels at the altar.
Well, and we talk about how in the liturgy, and the priest will say this, the cherubic hymn, where we cry to God with the cherubic hymn. But not only that, but also there's a prayer that the priest says during liturgy, where he says, that we're here, but, also there stands, 10,000s of angels, 1,000 archangels and 10,000s of other heavenly bodies that are with us. That they're literally legions of angels. And, there have been people and monks and great ascetics who have said that, even when they've celebrated liturgy, they've seen, legions of angels literally in the church, just filling it up. So, they're there too. And, also the saints are there as well. But we'll also go into talking about that the Orthodox Church, and I guess we can talk about it right now, that the Orthodox Church that we don't draw a fundamental difference between the church on earth and the church in heaven. The Roman Catholics and a lot of Protestants, they have what's called a church militant, a church triumphant, meaning the church on earth and the church in heaven. We don't differentiate. The church is one, whether it's on earth or in heaven. Church by itself is a union. By default, it's a union of the terrestrial and the celestial. That's how we would explain it. Does that make sense?
That brings up a minor question that's occurred to me sometimes in that respect. And that is that when we ask for the prayers for individual people. We separate the living and the dead. We have one set of names for the living and another for the dead. Why do we do that or why would that be appropriate if they're really united?
I think it's more of an organizational thing.
Uh-huh.
I mean, we do believe
Just
that
for our
there-
convenience. in
that
other
I think
words.
it's probably for our convenience and perhaps for our own sort of three-dimensional minds
Mhm.
to do that.
Okay. That's an adequate reason.
I mean, because
But it doesn't reflect a real distinction between the living and the dead.
I mean, we believe that those that have died in Christ are more alive than we are.
Mhm.
But most importantly, and I think this is one thing that we struggle with here in the West, is that we're continually sort of bombarded with this idea that our senses are bad, that our bodies are bad. You ask a lot of people what do they think about death? What's going to happen to them after they die? And it's sort of almost platonic that they're going to die and they're sort of just going to become like, I call it spheres. And they just sort of become big balls of energy or something. Or, you know.
The soul, the real me, is liberated from this
Right,
nasty body.
from this husk.
Uh-huh.
The Orthodox Church would say no. That we were meant to be in our bodies.
God made us that way.
God made us that way. And we are going to be in our bodies. You know, that we were meant to live eternity in our bodies.
No, that's Joanna. She's...
Yeah, it's okay, it's my daughter. My wife's out there, so.
Just a perfected body, correct?
The perfected body, yes. So that we will have a body like Christ's. I mean, as it says in I'm trying to remember in the book of Common Prayer.
Yeah. I can't remember.
In the funeral service. It's reading from
Yeah,
the epistle.
right.
But anyway, but it's our perfected bodies. That our bodies won't be subject to disease and things like that at the second coming. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I'll be younger.
So, earthly worshipers are continually minded through their senses of the heavenly state of the church. And this is done through sights, by seeing icons, seeing vestments, seeing other things in the church that we can recognize as far as adornments on the altar, adornments in the church, even seeing the incense smoke, sounds, chanting, singing, bells, smells, and this is, and I always tell this to people. I think Father Patrick Reardon said this, and it's kind of funny. A lot of people will come to me and they'll complain about incense. And I tell them that there are only two smells in the afterlife. One is incense, the other is brimstone. There's no alternative. But it's just a joke. But what I don't want people to be afraid of incense because one, incense is it's something that helps us facilitate worship because what is the sense that's most tied to memory? It's smell. It's smell. I'm making a roux, and when I make it, it reminds me of my grandfather. My grandfather's been dead for almost a decade now. But when I make a roux, it reminds me of my grandfather because I remember my grandfather making gum. Shalimar will always remind me of my wife. And if my wife, predeceases me, God forbid, Shalimar will always be one of those things that reminds me of her. She's kind of looking weird, but is it Shalimar or Yasmin and pear trees?
Yasmin.
Yasmin, yeah, it's probably Yasmin and pear trees then. But anyway,
8 times more.
but again, our smells are tied to memory. And so incense is important because I think when someone walks in to a church and they smell incense, they know that they're in church. It triggers something in the mind where, okay, now I'm not just stepping into any old mundane place, I'm stepping into a sacred space, which is important. That and I think that maybe as Americans we've sort of been sterilized as far as smells and scents. And, I mean, it's very, very
Our world
different.
doesn't contain as many smells as it once did.
As it once did, right. You sort of get this in Europe too.
Yeah.
Europe is a little bit, less sterile than us. But anyway, in actions, the sign of the cross, doing matanyas, prostrations, doing things that are physical, that we worship with our bodies, and of course tastes, tasting wine, tasting communion. The other night we did, for the feast, we did the blessing of the 5 loaves with archangel, which anybody can receive, even if they're not Orthodox. And cutting up the sweet bread and then sprinkling it with the olive oil and then the sweet wine and then giving that to people. I mean, it's a very physical moment. And eating, consuming something is something that's very, very intimate, which is one of the ways that we use senses in worship. Okay. The next thing that we're going to get is into structure of services. Services often commemorate things. You often look at the commemorations for the day, and towards the end of the service, right at the end, the priest will also say what we commemorate, whether it's a specific feast day or a specific saint, which is something that's very, very different from Protestant worship.
One of the things that seems a little strange to me is that, as happened tonight, we sang a number of prayers about St. John the Merciful, but we didn't actually hear who it was that we were talking about until the end.
Right.
And so, always, if I'm not the one doing the reading and then I know, then I'm thinking, well, who is this? I guess it's a good thing in a way because it makes me think about it. It makes me think, okay, who is it who's they're talking about? But it's sort of like a guessing game, and then towards the end you get, it's John the Merciful tonight.
Well, for the people, I guess it would be. Us, we've got the benefit of the Manaean, where we can just look at, okay, November 12th, St. Niles and St. John the Merciful.
I usually know, because I'm usually one of the people reading it,
but I also think that this should encourage lay people to know the saint of the day.
It's true, we all have calendars.
Either through personal readings, and we've got the internet now,
right.
So you can go in and see what the saint of the day is. I think that with the feasts and the saints, it's another reminder that our worship connects us to something that's outside ourselves. That it connects us to the saints. And that the reason why the saints are important is that we don't worship them, but we venerate them in the same way that we venerate people that we want to be like. That when we have icons on the walls of saints, these are people that have fought the good fight. These are people that have won the race. They're people to emulate.
Well, they're really important to me. I was raised Presbyterian without any saints, and now their testimony is really important to me. If you ask, why do I believe in God? Why do I accept the Orthodox Church? The answer is too complex for me to give. But the most concrete thing I think I would probably say is because of the saints, or at least certain ones that have that really speak to me that I say, well, I want to be like that person. I want to, if that person believed these things and was the kind of person they are, then I want to believe these things so that I can be that kind of person. And that is just, it's very, very important to me. And I really couldn't manage without the saints.
Right. You know, I think it's, you know, they're also, they're also symbols of how we should be, how we should, what we should emulate. There's a great story. I can remember the story. I'm probably butchering it severely. But my diaconal ordination is tomorrow. Well, I celebrate the anniversary of it. And Bishop Basil gave a sermon, and it was on St. John the Merciful's Day. And he gave a sermon about St. John the Merciful didn't really perform miracles per se. I mean, he didn't, you know, wave a wand, people were healed, or, you know, he didn't part the sea.
Walk on water.
He didn't walk on water. If you looked at him, he was nothing remarkable. But we call him the Merciful because he was very charitable. I mean, he was so charitable that according to his hagiography, he gave up everything that he had in order to help the poor. I mean, even from his own pocket, his own. You know, he would sell the furniture out of his own house and give it to a beggar or something. And there was one time when he didn't have anything left, and he had helped everybody that could be helped. And according to his hagiography, the Archangel Gabriel appeared to him as a beggar. You asked him, "Why are you crying?" And he said, I'm crying because I have no more alms to give. I can't find anybody else to help. And I mean, just to sort of have that mentality. I'm sad because I can't find anybody else to help. You know, I mean, that's very remarkable.
It would be very remarkable in our world today.
Now, services in the Orthodox Church are a bit different than Protestant, or even in Catholicism you sort of see it, but it's a mix now, thanks to Vatican II. But services in the Orthodox Church are almost always sung. You'll notice that when I do Vespers tonight, I didn't really read a lot. I always sang the petitions. I sang the prayers. And so it's getting people into this mindset that they're in something different, that they're in a place that's not mundane, which is one reason why services are always sung. And services begin and end with the sign of the cross. Okay. The main services that make up the day in the Orthodox Church, and you won't see this in parishes because parishes normally won't. But if you were to go to a monastery, the hours will be prayed. And the hours are Vespers, Compline, Midnight Office, Matins, first hour, third hour, sixth hour, and ninth hour. Matins and Vespers and liturgy you'll see most often in parishes, and those are on specific days.
Well, they could be done every day.
They could be done every day, but asking a parish to keep the monastic rule would be very, very difficult. They could be done every single day. In a perfect world, it would be nice if the parish could do this. But the ultimate expression of our worship is the divine liturgy, because of the presence of the Eucharist. It's because of the Eucharist that the Church and the people are bestowed their ontology. Ontology means their being, the definition of who they are as people. I think that it's important for us to go to the Eucharist every single Sunday, because it's not just an act of just taking this in order to.
لأني لست أقول سرك لأعدائي ولا أعطيك قبلة رشة مثل يهود